Hey guys, Lockie from Focus Performance Training. So last week I touched on two very basic, programming or training principles being frequency and intensity. That video went for about 20 minutes. This time, we're going through programming principles. Now, this video, to sort of save on upload time and the total time it'll take to sort of get out to you guys, I'm going to do a brief overview of each of the 7 programming principles, which I think have been articulated well in research and in books, and what sort of guide how I program and sort of where I think the most effort needs to be. Okay, so I'll make no comments about it. These programming principles, if you've read Juggernaut Strength Training, Juggernaut Training Systems, Scientific Principles of Strength Training, these have come straight from there. However, they're not just from that book and from the Juggernaut system and from Chad Basley and Max Aeta and Mike Israetel. They've looked at them themselves, have done a lot of research, i.e. from super training, from periodization for sports, NSCA guides, all those sort of books and really big manuals and resources when it comes to strength conditioning programming still reference these theories or ideologies. Not really ideology, but these theories and principles in general. Okay, so when we look at programming, we need to figure out what we're doing first. So a lot of the time you'll hear a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's where we go through and we analyze what the athlete needs. Now from that, we can get a whole list of areas we need to work on. As an example, 100-meter sprinter, or they want 100-meter sprinting, and maybe their power, we realize that their strength is their finish, but their weakness is their power out of the gate. Where the opportunities are going to be in their upcoming sort of programming, where they're going to be able to work, and what are some threats to the program and what might make this program fail, or maybe some past injuries, all that sort of stuff. And that helps us then break down what we need to achieve into these 7 principles or around about. Now there are some other ones you can throw in there, but these will cover off on them as a matter of fact. Now I've numbered them in green based off importance or the amount that it's going to have, or the overall effect it'll have on the program and the success of the program. Now, number 1 being specificity. Now, specificity can be to the sport, can be to the phase of training, can be to the athlete type. It encompasses many things. But when we look at specificity on a 10,000 foot view, for example, we're looking at what specific traits or physiological traits this athlete need to be good at their job or to be good at their sport. 100-meter sprinter, we need power, we need explosive capabilities, we need the fast twitch muscle fibers to be the predominant muscle fiber that we train, and we need them to be mobile. We need them to have a very good reaction time. So a lot of the time, that's where you lose some of your race, okay? So we're looking to that specificity of what this athlete needs. We look at a rugby player, and we'll look at a breakaway or a flanker, for example, in rugby. They're going to need a really high aerobic capacity because they're running and they're getting to every breakdown, either the blind side, which is there's 2 flankers in rugby union, blind side and open side. A lot of the time, one of those 2, or both of them, will be at every breakdown. And they need to get to that breakdown and then be explosive enough to either secure a ball or clear out the opposition, which is getting to low position, driving through, getting someone off balance. They then need to be able to sprint to the next one, get there, so they've got a large sprint repeatability. They need a lot of power, a lot of strength to be able to hold position, and they need to do that under fatigue as well. You look at a weightlifter, it's much easier. They need to have high amounts of strength, high amounts of explosive ability, good mobility, and very good proprioception within it, like using a barbell, okay? So that's where we look at the specificity of an athlete, deciding what the program needs to be tailored for, okay? So you might write the best weightlifting program, but if you're programming for a triathlete, it's not going to make that triathlete good at triathlons. And that's why specificity is so important. At the absolute basic level, you need to program for what the athlete or the sport requires. Okay. Number 2 being overload. And if you sort of touched on this a little bit last week with volume, overload, if you've ever heard of the term progressive overload, overload simply looks at or talks to the ability to progressively add a challenge or add a stress to the athlete not day to day sometimes, week to week, across cycles. So we're gradually increasing the stressor, the physiological stressor on the body each time we train them, so that they can adapt to that and improve and move on. Without an overload, athlete will just plateau, or they'll reverse. If we just hold the same intensity and the same load the whole way through, then generally what we're going to find is athletes are going to come back and they're going to experience reversibility or detraining, or they're just going to hang there and they're not going to improve. And if you're not improving, there is times where you don't really want to improve, i.e. over here, I'll talk on that, or when we're in sort of the finals phase, all the work's been done, we just need to maintain and keep the guys fresh. And so that's an important part. Are we in a phase where we're going to overload them, or do we need to keep them just fresh and on the field and their readiness high? And that's a very important part too, because that dictates what sort of program you're going to write. Next one is a stimulus recovery adaptation, or the SRA curve. Now, a lot of the old periodization, very original periodization, was based on original research on stress, and that looked at the general adaptation syndrome, which is basically, so if we've got a graph here like this, down and across, and because I've got new markers, I'm going to use different colors because it makes it easier. And if this black line is our sort of average performance, bear with me, I'm not an artist like I've said before, and just here we add the stress. So we've had stress, we'll come down below the line, we'll then recover, come back up, and we'll experience supercompensation. And if we don't, wow, it's a really bad curve. If we don't apply the curve again, we'll then come back down to original point. So we've had the stress, we've got the shock phase, shock and alarm phase, we've then got the recovery phase through to here, and then once we pass that, we get to the supercompensation phase where we reach a high level of performance over time, and then if we don't provide a stimulus again, then we're going to slowly lose those adaptations and regress. Alright, so that's gonna differ depending on the stimulus we're providing. Now, I'll break this down into something that might be a little bit difficult, but I'll try and make it easy to explain, or easy to understand, sorry. So, in weightlifting, it's my sport, there's a skill and a strength component. Now, the skill component is going to take a little bit less time to recover from. So we can sort of add a technical aspect or a skill aspect a little bit more frequently than compared to, say, a back squat or heavy pulls. We're going to have a much more taxing effect from really heavy squats, really heavy pulls quite frequently. So we can't program them as much. Okay, we need to be aware of that and allow the body to recover from those stresses or those stimulus. Whereas a skill stimulus, we can tend to see that sort of middle phase once we've done it, and there's that the brain will go through the process of ingraining that skill pattern or ingraining that motor pattern, and it'll do that quite quickly. And we can then add another skill stimulus quite quickly, because if you look at skill, it's generally low intensity, and in the early stages, low intensity, low stress, and it's just very much working on drilling patterns. Okay, so if I can look at that in something a little bit more mainstream, let's look at rugby union again, or cricket. So if we look at cricket, look at the batting and the way that the amount of time batsmen spend in the nets batting. If we're looking at breaking down the skill, they'll spend time batting off a cone, and that's really, really easy to recover from. But another stimulus that we need to apply in cricket is repeated sprint ability for threes, and that takes a lot longer to recover from. If you do that too much, you're just going to burn yourself in the ground. But you can hit tees you can hit balls off a tee almost every day, all day, and as long as you're doing it right, you should be okay. You're going to be able to recover from it. Okay, so that's stimulus recovery adaptation. Now, before that, we look at recovery and fatigue management, and this sort of feeds into these two are very intertwined, and that's why I wanted that one there and that one to come next. All right. So, recovery and fatigue. Now, there's a lot on this at the moment in terms of recovery modalities. What's the best way to recover? All that sort of stuff. Do I get a formula? Do I get a trigger point ball? Do I get an ice bath? All that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. If you're in a tournament like a back-to-back tournament, like a touch tournament or rugby sevens tournament, or you're playing in some form of tournament that's going to be back-to-back CrossFit events or a good one where you've got multiple events in a day, that's when I'd recommend ice baths. If you're looking at just training, wouldn't recommend them. So that's my little 2 cents in ice bath. But recovery fatigue management. Let's look at what recovery modalities are we implementing to recover as best we can. Is a nutrition on point? Are we sleeping enough? How hard are we training? How often are we training? All that comes into that fatigue management and recovery. So fatigue management speaks to when we look at external stress as well. So we've got physiological stresses when we're applying stress from training. We've got stresses that coaches we can't control. We can't control their life. We can't control what their financial point is. We can't control if the girlfriend's just broken up with them. We can't control if their car's broken down, if the boss is giving them a hard time, if they're on finals or they've got exams at school, if their mum's having a go at them. We can't control any of that, and all those stresses add to fatigue. So we need to be aware of that when we're programming. Okay, so talked on that, and that will massively affect how long it takes to recover, and that will affect this adaptation curve. Okay, so if we've got really poor fatigue management and poor recovery modalities, it's going to affect our ability to recover. Okay, the next one being variation. Now, variation is the change in exercise, change in environment, change in what we're doing. This is sort of the idea of monotony. So if we're doing the same thing day in, day out, day in, exact same stuff all the time, same area, same environment, nothing changes, it increases our risk of injury, funnily enough, because we look at load, monotony, and strain as sort of things we can calculate to determine how well people are going if they're at risk of injury. If we don't vary things enough, we're going to cause some problems. Now, this is actually sort of counterintuitive to specificity in some aspects. So, if you look at powerlifting, we need to be very specific to a squat, bench, and dead. Okay? But if we don't provide enough variation away from training, then we're going to almost open ourselves up to a lot of injury. So if we do the same thing again and again, then we're going to create movement patterns which are going to be very specific to them, which isn't a bad thing, but that's going to open us up to injuries. So when we're in that sort of general physical performance phase, away from when we're going to be performing, so in rugby or footy or in team sports, that's our pre-season. In strength sports, that's 18, 22 weeks away from comp, probably up to that 12 to 10 week, and then we're looking very, very specific movements for those 10 weeks. So we can really roll into that as best we can. Okay? So variation helps with injury prevention. It helps with keeping guys interested in the program. And it helps with developing general physical preparedness, so we can give them some stuff which is going to take muscles through a full range of motion, help get blood flow, and help to just change things up a little bit. So when we're looking at that really far away from training, in say strength athletes, that's when we can throw in a little bit of conditioning, increase their work capacity, because that isn't very specific to hitting a 1 rep max. Okay, but when we're getting close, we can pull that back, and our variation tends to decrease. But further away, variation's high. When we get closer to competition, variation is very low, and that's an important factor to remember as well. Okay, phase potentiation, or peaking, or realization. And this is the phase where we go through and all the work we've done in the past program, all that sort of background, the foundations we've laid. This is like putting everything together in the house. So you've built the house, the foundations are down, the roof's down, the electrical stuff's down, the plaster's down, and now what you're doing is when you finally go to sale, when you're going to sell the house, you're realizing how much it's worth, how much you've done. And that's when things sort of come to fruition. And that is when we're building forward, we're in that last phase, and we're getting the body ready to go. So this is when you see in strength sports much more 1RMs and heavy singles, heavy doubles, and we're really getting used to using those weights. In team sports, this looks like the last 2 to 3 days before they go and play the game on a week-to-week basis. So this can be sort of spread out across a week-to-week basis in team sports and across a large cycle as well. So in those last day, 2 days before they go and play a game for rugby, they'll pull back, they'll let the work they've done through the start of the week, they'll let that supercompensation effect occur through that stimulus, recovery, adaptation, recovery, and fatigue management. And then the guys should be ready to go on the weekend, eager to go. And that's the whole idea. When I look at coaching strength athletes, so weightlifters, powerlifters, crossfitters, I know I've done that right when sort of 2-3 days before they're about to compete or it's go day, they are itching to go. They want to go and lift. They really want to go and hit weights and work their ass off. They're like, I want this bad now. I want to go and do it. And you've got to pull them back. That's when you know you've sort of timed it right and things are going well. Of course, if you get that too early on, then you've probably timed it wrong and you're going to miss that sort of perfect window and they're going to start decreasing a little bit. So it's about timing. And that one's very much an art and knowing your athlete. What I found with coaching female weightlifters is they can actually deal with a little bit of a shorter peak phase or a shorter realization phase and still be good to go. So they can recover a little bit quicker from it because their loads aren't absolutely as taxing on the body as it tends to be with males. And there's a bit of research, and this is a little bit of hearsay, so bear with me on this one. Females tend to have less of an ability to draw on an absolute number from the nervous system. So, for example, sort of to put that into perspective, males tend to be able, but these are just numbers, don't quote me on them, and they're just sort of to give you an idea. Males can draw on, say, 90-95% of their true strength, and the body holds back, say, 5%, whereas females, they tend to hold back a little bit more. Their nervous system doesn't fire as efficiently because they don't have as much testosterone, they're not as innovative, they don't have as large muscle fibers, so they can't cause as much damage. Like I said, no real research on that. This is sort of what I've heard from listening and talking to some very, very knowledgeable strength athletes who've been around for a long time, and it's what they've experienced. So I'm going off that experience there, and unfortunately that's really hard to test in research. So take that with a grain of salt. It may be true, it may not be true. I tend to agree that it's true, but I can't 100% advise on it, okay? And the last one, individuality. Okay, this is that sort of icing on the cake. This is when you make the program nice and Gucci. You look at sort of injuries, illnesses, sort of weird twerks that athlete might have. This is when you look at, okay, they're weak in this position or they've got this injury, I'm going to program this. This is when you look at their specific rehab for me. We're looking at how much load can they take, and then we start to play around with those sort of parameters. So it's has the least impact across the whole program compared to these, but it's still an important aspect of the programming, because if you don't program for the individual, you'll lose buy-in, the athlete won't believe in it, you'll sort of just generic programs, and that's not really what we want to do. We want to develop programs as strength and conditioning coaches for athletes and for people who we're working with that's individual for them and it's working for them based off what they've come to you with, okay? So specificity and individuality can be very, very tied together in that if the program isn't individualized, then it's not specific. And if the program's not specific for what they need, then it's not individualized. So they sort of work together. If you've done a SWOT analysis on someone and realize that they're weak off the blocks in a sprinting movement, then you're going to develop a fair bit of explosive work because you've identified that that's a weakness. So you've individualized the program. Individuality can even mean that the percentages are based off, or their weights are based off their 1RM. So the weights are specific to them. When we look at strength training, there are 1,000 ways you can skin a cat, but at the end of the day, it's all going to be quite similar in that we can't move 100% loads for 10 RMs. We can only move them for 1 reps. So it's going to be very dictated by what we're programming, how we're programming, and the rest periods we get. Okay? So this is a little, or I guess a brief overview of what the programming principles are, how I go through programming, and when I'm programming for people, what I take into consideration. So if you get a program from me, you can pretty much guarantee that I've gone through these 7 points and that program has been developed off that based on you. If I've written a program specifically for you, if I've written a program based on areas that I see that are common, i.e. people failing to get full extension in their weightlifting, energy system work that I think I believe that the general public can benefit greatly from improving their aerobic capacity or improving their lactic threshold capacity or their power. Develop those programs around that. Taking all these into consideration, and the individuality piece would be that'd be as a percentage of what your testing shows me. Right. So I hope this has helped, guys. Click the subscribe below. I'm gonna, like I said, releasing these on a weekly basis on Monday nights. If I miss it, send me a message, hit me up. Otherwise, leave some comments below. Thanks for watching.